The downgrade to America's exalted credit status, the financial wake-up call heard around the world. But our next guest, he warned that it could happen. He said it months ago, but says that Congress, they pressed the snooze button. Congressman Tim Huelskamp, Republican of Kansas, joins us. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
So in April, I think it was back at least April 18th, the S&P, they threatened that we were on our way to a downgrade. At that time, you said that the threat of a downgrade, it should be a wake-up call like we just said. So what happened?
Well, they hit the snooze button in Washington. S&P warned us if we didn't make significant changes in our spending patterns, and we would have this potential downgrade. And Washington spent the last 2 or 3 months, I think, being dragged around by the administration, suggesting it was all about default. The real issue is all about downgrade. There was not going to be a default, but now, because of our inability to make the necessary spending cuts, we have this downgrade, at least by one of the credit rating agencies.
Speaking of those spending cuts, you broke with Speaker Boehner last week. You voted against the debt deal. Why?
It certainly wasn't enough, and this is exactly what we expected to happen. This was what we were warned would happen. Again, no default. It would be a downgrade. We were told needed at least cut $4 trillion, and what most Americans think, those spending cuts were going to come quickly. And but the final bill that was signed by President Obama only made approximately $50 to $60 billion in cuts in the first 2 years. The rest of the cuts were out years, but the credit rating agencies were willing to assume we'd make the remainder of those cuts of the next $4 trillion over the next decade. So we're looking at a long-term plan, obviously, and they weren't immediate cuts, but we needed to have something significant in the first year or two because, frankly, you can't expect future Congresses to do what previous Congresses have never done, and that's balance their budget.
Now, depending on who you listen to today, there's a lot of back and forth going on. Democrats like Harry Reid, Nancy Pelosi, saying that this is a sign that we should raise taxes or increase revenues. In fact, here's what Harry Reid said. The action by S&P reaffirms the need for a balanced approach to deficit reduction. He talked about that. That combines spending cuts with revenue-raising measures like closing taxpayer-funded giveaways to billionaires, oil companies, corporate jet owners, talking about that again. So which is it, or is it a combination of both, revenues and spending cuts?
Well, there's a simple solution, as Reagan used to say, just not an easy one. And frankly, we just spent too much money. These statements coming from President Obama and Senator Reid come from the same folks that ran nearly $1 trillion up on a stimulus package that's been a complete failure. And after $1 trillion worth of spending and borrowing, we have 9.1% employment. The idea now that they want to come in and have massive tax increases is going to continue to stall economic growth. We have tremendous uncertainty out there, healthcare uncertainty, tax uncertainty, and regulatory uncertainty. I really believe if you want to get more revenue, Mr. Reid, Mr. Obama, you let entrepreneurs create more revenue by backing off your regulatory actions that are unprecedented at the level this administration is pushing those through. So there's a pretty simple solution. That's for Washington to do less, not to do more, as the president would have us believe.
Well, let's take a look at this, though. In the S&P statement, another portion, they very clearly said that the reason for the downgrade was congressional dysfunction. And here it goes a little bit further. We lowered our long-term rating on the U.S. because we believe that the prolonged controversy over raising the statutory debt ceiling and the related fiscal policy debate indicate that further near-term progress containing the growth in public spending, especially on entitlements, or on reaching an agreement on raising revenues is less likely than we previously assumed. So how do we resolve this? How do we fix the congressional dysfunction?
Well, I am hopeful that when members of the Congress, particularly the Senate, go home for a few weeks and actually listen to the American people. I've conducted 64 town halls in my district, and they're very clear. Cut the spending now. Cut it now, cut it in the midterm, and long-term pass a balanced budget amendment to make certain the world knows we're serious about our problems. Italy is going down that track. I think they've assured the world that even though they haven't made the cuts the last few years, they need to do to balance their budget. A balanced budget amendment is necessary, I think, to assure the world that we're really serious about this. Again, the cuts that were proposed were minimal. They were minuscule. They were less than 1% of the deficit this year. However, if we could pass a balanced budget amendment, it would provide those assurances that later Congresses couldn't undo the cuts we need to make to balance our budget and move along the trajectory that will assure our creditors that, yes, we're serious about getting our fiscal house in order.
Well, maybe this will encourage that super Congress to come up with more than $1.2 trillion in cuts by Thanksgiving. What do you think about that?
Well, unless they're willing to debate entitlements, the House has passed a budget that made significant long-term changes to actually protect Medicare and Social Security by making reforms to make it workable. That's where we have the problem.
All right.
But when you have President Obama and Senator Reid refusing to touch entitlements, we can't touch the problem.
Well, we'll see. We'll see what the president has to say if he says anything about this on Monday. Thank you very much, Congressman Huelskamp. Thank you.